The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, today, as Father said, is the eve of the glorious Apostle of Ireland, St. Patrick. And today we have with us as guests the Ancient Order of Hibernians. The Ancient Order of Hibernians is a society that promotes Irish culture, Irish music, and Irish history. But one of the beautiful things about the Hibernians is that they all go back to about the 1830s, and they were founded to protect the clergy and the Irish immigrants coming to the United States.
Thank you.
So, on this feast of this wonderful, or eve of this feast, and as we contemplate this reading about the Transfiguration, I want to tell you an Irish story that is a peak moment in this Irishman's life. Just as for the apostles today, certainly is a peak experience seeing Jesus transfigured. And this is a story, it's an Irish tale, and it happened right here in this church, not too long ago. Now, these folks over here have probably heard the adult version of this, so I'm going to give you the PG version, since we're in church. But a parishioner by the name of Paddy O'Neill, lifetime member of St. Vincent de Paul Church, his family goes all the way back to the founding of the parish in 1837, decided after a few years it's about time to go to confession, especially during Lent. So Paddy decides to go to the pastor, Father Norman O. Douglas. Coming in a little early, Paddy opens the door of the confessional, and he can't believe his eyes. There's a soft recliner chair, a flat screen TV with the game on, a small refrigerator filled with beverages, a Keurig coffee maker, a shelf of the world's finest chocolates. And he says, wow, this is incredible. What a peak experience this confession is going to be. And as he stood there transfigured, here comes Father O. Douglas. And Paddy says, Father, I love what you've done to the confessional. And Father replies, get out of there, you knucklehead. You're on my side. They're not laughing. They heard that. So that was a short-lived peak moment for Paddy. You know, sometimes all of us have these peak moments in our lives we all share. And once in a while, those peak experiences are a result of someone else's action, maybe years and years ago, that resulted maybe unintentionally in a peak experience for us. And I want to give you two examples from my own life, and I'm sure all of us could cite examples like this. But this has to do with my dad and my wife Paula's dad. A couple years ago, Paula and I went on a cruise, the Panama Canal. And during the Second World War, my father was stationed in the Panama Canal at the fort there, the Army fort. And his job and our troops' job was to protect the canal from enemy ships. Well, fortunately, they never saw any combat. And I thought to myself, you know, how fortunate for my father that he wasn't sent to the South Pacific or the European theater, where we lost a combined total of about 500,000 troops. But my peak experience was looking in the binoculars at the fort where my dad was stationed. And it's not a fort anymore. It's a military or a police academy. But I had a peak experience there looking at that thinking, you know, when my dad was a young man and he volunteered for the service, he certainly knew that in the back of his mind, he could be in combat or go out in harm's way. But he didn't. How fortunate for me and for my family that he never saw that. So that may not have been a peak experience for him, those 4 years, but it certainly was for me seeing that. And then maybe more traumatic was my wife Paula. A couple years ago, she and I were in Palm Springs, California, because we wanted to go to the World War II Air Museum that had the airplane, one of the airplanes, that my father-in-law, her dad, flew 34 missions in World War II in the South Pacific. The plane was, it's called a PBY. It was a seaplane. It was used for reconnaissance and for taking pictures of the enemy. It wasn't a fighter. It only had one gun and one bomb. And a lot of times it was used to move the officers, the admirals, from one front to another in the South Pacific. But the thing about this is, this plane was so vulnerable that many of them were shot down. And my father-in-law was in this plane 34 times. And the reason we knew it was his plane is because the museum had called us and said, on the skin of the plane where he sat, he wrote his name, his serial number, and the date. Right? October 21st, 1942, Robert Buchanan, United States Navy. And when my wife and I walked out on that tarmac, and we saw that plane sitting there, knowing all those stories my father-in-law told, I looked at her, she looked at me, and we just broke down crying. What a peak moment, knowing that my father-in-law was in that plane 34 times, and he could have easily been killed, right? 300,000 men lost their lives in the South Pacific, and he survived. And she wouldn't be standing there, and I wouldn't be standing there. So, I just share with those, knowing that all of us have these peak moments that sometimes come years later on something that someone else did. And all of us, one thing we all have in common are these peak moments that we cherish. Maybe it was the birth of your first child or any of your children. Maybe it was their first communion, a wedding, getting ordained, watching your kids ride a bike for the first time, catching your first fish, hitting a home run, making a shot at the buzzer, going to Ireland and seeing the Cliffs of Moher, on and on and on. All of us share these moments, but they're moments that we cherish because they are moments of revelation with a capital R. These are the times that God is taking the ordinary and making them extraordinary, making life livable, right? It's God shining through. And we cherish those. We write them down in diaries and journals, and we tell those stories over and over to our children and grandchildren because they have so much meaning for us. And it make life bearable. And I think that's what's happening in the Gospels today. The apostles have been on the road with Jesus now. They have seen what he can do, and they see it's not an easy task to go from town to town and be harassed by the Pharisees. And, at the same time, of course, the crowds love Jesus and they love, but it's a lot of work. And sometimes they get doubtful. And they get frustrated, and they get tired. And Jesus has just told them that the next stop is going to be Jerusalem, where Jesus will be arrested, tortured, and crucified. And what does Peter say? God forbid this would happen to you, Lord. And after this shocking, unexplainable explanation, maybe they needed a transfiguration experience, a peak moment. And Jesus shows himself in his divinity with Moses and Elijah and the clouds in heaven. And maybe that was just enough for them to know that they're not alone, that their God is truly the Son of God. And they come down off that mountain. They want to stay forever. Don't we all? Every time we have a peak moment, don't we just want to stay there and never want it to go away and just, be there forever? But life happens, right? Life goes on. The apostles, they wanted to put up 3 tents or 3 booths and just stay there. But Jesus knew there was a lot of work to be done. He called them to be missionary disciples. That's a word that we use a lot in this parish. We're all called to be missionary disciples. We're all called to continue the work of proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ. And we can't do it alone. It takes the power of the Holy Spirit and those revelatory moments, right, that keep us going, those peak experiences. So, during Lent, as we sometimes drudge our way through with, offering up things and giving alms and trying to be a little more diligent, the church gives us this Sunday a little break to remind us what's coming. And that is the ultimate peak experience, the resurrection, that we look forward to not only in Jesus' resurrection, but even in ourselves. And I want to conclude with this. This is a little corny, but you all know I'm a little corny, right? But I was thinking to myself, I told Paula, I don't want to be buried in a coffin. I don't want to be cremated in an urn. I want you to put me in one of those little mausoleums, And she said, good luck with that. They're kind of expensive. And here's why. Do you remember in that movie called Independence Day, there's a scene where Randy Quaid is in the jet fighter and he's going towards the alien ship and he's going to die and he's doing it, to save the world and to save our country. And there he is. And what does he say? Hello, boys, I'm back. That's what I want to happen when I burst out of that tomb. The ultimate resurrection experience. Hello, boys, I'm back.